Good evening. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Welcome to the latest in our series of Facebook town hall meetings. We'll be discussing various issues, taking some of your questions, and talking to folks who are here in county government about tonight's issue, which is the environment. It's an open discussion on environmental issues. Now, we're here until 7 o'clock, and it is absolutely impossible to do justice to all of the possible questions that we might get, whether it's county-level environmental issues or things that affect us wherever we may live, in state and federal issues as well as local ones. But we're going to do our dead-level best to address some of the questions, and I'm joined tonight by two individuals who are deeply involved in environmental issues here in Westchester County government. On my executive team is Peter Mccart, who is Director of Sustainability for our administration, and in his private volunteer life, he is head of the Eastchester Environmental Committee, and he's been very active in Sustainable Westchester and a host of other groups, aside from working previously in corporate life on Madison Avenue and doing a host of other things as well. And then I'm also joined by legislator Ruth Walter, who's with us here. She represents Bronxville and a section of East Yonkers in the county legislature, and she is a small business owner by profession, has a wonderful retail shop, Dobbs and Bishop, on the main street, Pondfield Road in Bronxville. But she's also very active in public service, heads the Bronxville Public Library, and does a number of other charitable things. And for our purposes tonight, she is chair of the Environment and Health Committee for the Westchester County Board of Legislators. So between the executive and legislative branches, we're here tonight with some authority and certainly a lot of interest on issues of the environment. Just anecdotally, and I hate to play the age card with my younger colleagues here, but I remember very well the first Earth Day, which I think for many of us in this generation we think of as the beginning of environmental consciousness in our country. The truth of the matter is probably the seminal work by Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, which was out in 1962, was the first real effort to look at environmental impact of things and what pollution looked like in its raw form back in the 1950s and the 1960s. But sad to say, in 1962, I was a kid in elementary school. In high school, my senior year in high school was the spring of 1970. That was a notable spring for a lot of reasons. It was the spring of Kent State and Jackson State and what was happening in the world with Vietnam and Cambodia. But on April 22nd, we had our first ever Earth Day. And Earth Day at that point in time was not the multi-pronged environmental set of policies as we understand it to be today. It was clean up a field at Mount Vernon High School, where I went to high school. And a lot of us young guys and girls went out to clean up a field to do something good for the environment. We might have just as easily been doing it because from a boy's standpoint there were girls there and it was a social moment. But whatever brought you into environmentalism, that was really, my first recollection of these things. And what we've seen over the years is an increasing understanding of science, of what the environmental impact is of our everyday living, the lifestyles that we live, the way we live our lives, and how accustomed we are to that. But at the same token, how science is giving us greater information about how some of that everyday living has to change and has to morph into a more environmentally conscious way of living. And it requires us to change behaviors. I recall, anecdotally, in the late 1980s, New York State made recycling source separation a law. And we had to separate glass, plastic, bottles, metal, and newspapers from the normal waste stream. And at the time, my mom and dad were alive, living, my mom in her 70s, my dad in his early 80s. And they lived in the same house for so many years in south side of Mount Vernon. And I was over visiting them, and I watched my mom get ready to take a glass jar that was finished storing in the garbage. And I said, "Mom, you can't do that." And she looked at me, and she said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, we have to protect the environment. We have to recycle that. You have to put it in a separate place so that it'll be collected." And, of course, she didn't really grasp the necessity for that. And she said a classic line, which I've thought of ever since. She says, "I've been doing it this way all my life." And she was right. She had been doing it this way all her life. And I've been doing certain things a certain way all my life. And now the challenge is we have to change the way we do those things because we have to show a greater sense of protection for the environment. The issues that we're going to talk about tonight, the issues you're going to ask us about, we'll be as candid as we can. We're not going to be able to get to all your issues. Some of them will be complicated and deserve a more thoughtful response as a follow-up. And we're going to ask Pete Mccart. I'll make sure that his email is out there. I'll ask you to follow up with Pete so that he can have some of that. He'll share those with Ruth. To the extent that they involve county public policy, We'll be as specific as we can to the extent that they involve decisions being made outside of county government or Westchester County government. There may be state issues, federal issues. There may be an issue in another community, another county perhaps. We'll still try to respond in some fashion. But at the core of all of this is to understand that if we continue on the path that we're on, exactly the way we are right now, we are not going to survive as a world. That there are environmental impacts to the way we live our lives every day. Some of those things involve modest changes. It's mom understanding that you put a separate canister next to your garbage can, you put glass, plastic, metal in that. But some of them are more profound. How many times we get behind the wheel of the car to make a trip, and what kind of car we're driving, and what impact that has, or what kind of buses we're running in our bus fleet. I want to invite Pete Mccart to talk about at least a few fingertip analysis of some of the environmental initiatives that we're working on. This is not meant to be the universe of all the things that we could do environmentally, but at least it'll give us a little footprint of what we're trying to do in the administration. And then I'll turn to Ruth and ask her a little bit about her legislative advocacy on the environment. So, Peter Mccart.
Well, George, very good lead in. For me, it was, remember the Indian that had the tear that came down? That was my moment. That made me realize that we need to protect our planet. And you touched on one aspect. We can control so much here with the county, and we have a lot to control, and we do a good job of it. Thanks to you, thanks to previous administrations, thanks to other people, thanks to the Board of Legislators. We got to look at three things: transportation, buildings, and our energy use. Those are the three big components of what's affecting the climate change. And the fourth part of it is the back end of it is how do we absorb carbon? How do we sequester it? How do we capture whatever that is? And we're going to talk about that too. So the first part of it is our energy use. How can we switch from fossil fuels over to renewable energy? We're very fortunate that we get our electricity from New York Power Authority, NYPA. And 70% of the electricity that they generate that we get is hydro. Hydro is very renewable. And they are moving more and more. They're very progressively and aggressively moving towards renewable energy. So that's a key part of it. But also, we are adding solar to our facilities. We have a major solar portfolio that we're working on and moving forward with in conjunction with NYPA. Quite frankly, they're helping us out. It's their benefit. And I don't know if you want me to go into the details of that or...
Well, we'll bring up some of the details as we have our general
Fair
conversation.
enough.
If you can just tick off some of those.
Yeah, fair enough. So the other part of it is buildings, and we do have a lot of buildings. And our energy use there. We also have facilities. So our facilities are the wastewater treatment plants. They're the pump stations. They're our potable water. And then our bus. Well, we're going to stay off the transportation. We'll stick with buildings and our energy use there. One of the programs that we started up here, which actually is a revenue generator, is our demand response program. So a few times during the summer, during the heat of the summer, during those dog days, we are called upon to draw down our energy use, mostly with our facilities because they use so much. A lot of times they could just bring them down for several hours and not use them. And if they need to, they have backup generators. Are they going to go to generators? Generators are not good, but only for a short time. And then we do the same thing here. We draw down our electricity, we draw down our air conditioning, we switch off elevators, and we draw that down. And the true benefit of that is the fact that then we don't go to brownouts and blackouts. Like you don't want to have that happen. And then you don't want the Con Eds of the world to then build more plants, build more fossil fuel plants and that. So if we can shave those peaks off and bring our energy use down during those times, we're good. They call them peak plants, peaker plants. So we want to stay away from those. And then transportation. Transportation is another key component, and we're doing anything and everything we can here. I think we're doing a phenomenal job. we don't want to just throw away our cars. We want to convert them as they age out, as we say. We will switch those over to electric vehicles. And we've been doing a very good job of that. That was done, with Bud Nicoletti. He was really starting. He was a really progressive mind on that. And we've been moving that over and over and over. We have a lot of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and we also have full electric vehicles. And that's just our internal fleet. And I can get into the numbers on that, but that's a third of our carbon footprint is transportation. Each one of these is about a third that I mentioned. So, and then our buses. So we have a full fleet of these electric diesel hybrid buses that they can run for a mile or two under full electric, which isn't much, but they call it depot mode. So when it's in the depot, they can just run on full electric, or when they're just sitting there, they're at a stop or whatever, all the diesels shut off and they can just run off this battery that's in the electric vehicle. We are also, can't wait to have this happen, we're getting 6 full electric buses. And that's just the beginning. We're going to be adding more and more electric vehicles. Yeah.
So, Pete, I want to transition to, with these types of initiatives we've talked about.
I could go on all night, too.
I know you could, and fortunately we have some time, but we want to make sure we get to some questions as well. But I want to turn to Ruth in her responsibilities as a legislative leader in the environment. And when I was first in the county legislature quite a while ago, I served as a member of the Environment Committee. And one of the issues that we talked about was how do we deal with household chemical cleanup. We had chemical cleanup days, and we had an initiative to see a permanent location set up for that purpose. And it seemed like an impossible dream back in 1992 when I was on the board. Today, when we went over to break ground on the new compost site, which is going to be there as a compost, both a legitimate compost facility and then one that we use for education purposes. Right across the way I saw the permanent site that was created a number of years ago, where you can go from Tuesday through Friday to drop off the same things that you could only do at those cleanup days before. And what it told me is that it is possible to have a legislative initiative and over time accomplish it. Ruth, so you now chair the committee that I was a member of all those years ago. What are some of the legislative initiatives and policy initiatives that you prioritize now as the new chair of the Environment and Health Committee?
Great. Thank you so much, County Executive Latimer. I'm so glad to be here with my friend Pete Mccart. And yes, I'm very excited to be the new chair of the Environment and Health Committee and work with my colleagues on initiatives at the legislative level. I do just want to tell a little bit about my involvement with the environment. We began as when I was a mother to young children, just trying to sort of clean up our own carbon footprint in the house. And then I saw something called The Story of Stuff, which is a little animated video that talks about how, as much as we can do on the consumer end, there's also policies that we need to advocate for. And so I'm excited to be in that position where I can influence some policies. And then the second story I want to tell is cleaning up the Bronx River last summer. I went with a group called the Bronx River Alliance, and you see all of this kind of waste, plastic bottles, little ketchup sachets, millions of little pieces of styrofoam. And it was just over the border into the Bronx, and I was like, well, where's all this coming from? And in truth, it's coming from Westchester. So, we need to sort of stop thinking of the economy in a linear way, and we need to start thinking of it as circular, meaning reusing materials instead of always going to raw plastic. So some of the initiatives we're working on at the Environment and Health Committee, we had 2 legislative committees on single-use plastic. So we're going to try to encourage as much as we can people to reuse. I love being here on the 9th floor because you do have reusable glasses, like in the old days when you have a glass of water, as opposed to everybody having a plastic water bottle. On the 8th floor, we have reusable metal drinking containers, which is great. So we had 2 single-use plastic meetings. We also had one on lead. So we're going to try to get people to get their own lead testing, their water tested. And that's, again, to get people to the point where they're comfortable drinking the water that we are so fortunate to have, which is clean and filtered and tested in our homes. And we also did an initiative on noise, which is one of the most irritating things that can happen when somebody's sort of driving by or is making other loud noises. So we're excited to work with our colleagues on this committee and to work with the ninth floor, the executive, and really make a greener, more healthy Westchester County. So, thanks.
The nature of a county government is that we're not organized around a policy area as much as we are organized around certain functions. So in Westchester County, we have a Department of Environmental Facilities, rather than, as the state does, a Department of Environmental Conservation, where all public policy related to environment falls under ENCON. Environmental facilities exist because we have specific tasks. One of the tasks is to treat sewerage. Public health reasons, obviously, for the growth of our area. We have about 3/4 of the county, maybe slightly more than that, that fit into one of our sewer districts, our 7 sewer treatment plants, and they are run by a department of county government. And that department is also responsible for picking up from transfer stations the garbage that's picked up by the local places. You know, when the Bronxville truck, the Eastchester truck, or the Rise City truck comes down the street, picks up garbage and recyclables and take it to a transfer station, and Westchester County takes over. Most people don't know that. At that point in time, it's Westchester County trucks, DEF personnel that are involved with taking it to Charles Point for the waste-to-energy plant, or taking the recyclables out at the various MRFs. But because we don't have an environmental department, an agency, we really don't tackle some of these broad-based policies except as we can fit them in to the whole. So when we talk about, for example, solar energy, everybody knows that we need more renewable energy. Solar and wind are the 2 renewable areas that have the greatest potential for the future. We are using hydro to the great extent. Pete, just very briefly talk about where we are with our solar energy programs.
Okay, so we have currently we have 2 phases. We have phase 1. Oh. Believe me, we have 2 phases. We have phase 1, which we're calling our low-hanging fruit. These are the facilities and properties that we could really get going quickly to really throw some solar up there, as I was saying. And those facilities are 2 bus depots, very large buildings, and perfect flat roofs, perfect for it.
Valhalla, one in Yonkers.
Yep, one in Yonkers and one in Valhalla. And then we have some other large buildings. Our Parks Administration building is one, our Archives building, and then the courthouse building. And then we have what we're also looking at is the parking lots of our parks. And some of the parks are just not ready for them, but we looked at Croton Point Park. The parking lot there is appropriate. And then we also see a small but important installation at Hilltop Hanover Farm. So that's our low-hanging fruit. We're already in process. We went out to RFP. We got 14 really strong proposals, and we went through a long process, but we selected one developer to work on that. Phase 2 are the properties that didn't make it into phase 1, and also adding in other customers or NIPA, which are all the municipalities and also schools. And any of them that have a site that is appropriate for solar. And we've got many proposals. Some just don't work. They've got trees or the buildings aren't right. So we're looking at 35 installations from around the municipalities, and as well as some of our properties will be the anchor of that. So that's phase 2, and we're already in the process of that. So
now, what we're talking about here is what can county government do? There's a broad-based desire to go to solar. We can't, as a government, legislate that. We can't really incentivize it because we don't have the financial resources that a state or a federal government would that could write down the cost for the average person. But what we're trying to do is to use county facilities to add to that portion of solar that is the mix of our energy, and thereby use fossil fuels that much less if we have solar in those kind of situations.
That is correct.
So that I use that as an example because so much of what we do at the county is structured around what does the county government do in and of itself as a physical entity and an employer, and we try to practice those things. You mentioned before about energy demand. The arrangements that we have to reduce energy demand is within the buildings and the facilities that we operate. We've tried to share that information with other governments. Private sector businesses would be on their own to be able to pursue the same situation. And then here in downtown White Plains, you won't be able to see out the windows here, but all of the high rises and the major buildings here that stay lit, they're not all residential facilities, and they represent a use of energy, electric energy, that could be reduced in demand when that demand is appropriate. So I use that as an example, and I ask Pete to contribute that so that you understand that what the county's scope of authority is limited. But within that scope of authority, there are things we can do. We can do certain things because we do operate as diverse a set of holdings as we have. And we do have a couple of facilities, as I've mentioned, and that facility at Valhalla be another one. So given the fact we've set the table for about 25 minutes, we want to make sure that people have some of their questions answered. We'll do our best. I'll play traffic cop. So if I think it's something that one of you can handle, I certainly want you to be able to speak, and then just jump in if you think there's an additional answer. Now, we've gotten a lot of questions already, and I want to highlight that we have some questions. We have a question from a person who contacted us in Mamaroneck Village regarding policies toward tree pruning in an area where they indicate that they're told by the local village that the county has to authorize that. A question like that, Pete will take up as a response rather than take up our time for all of us to talk about. It's a site-specific issue, it's a legitimate issue, but we want to handle that as a constituent issue rather than a broad-based discussion of what we can do on behalf of the environment. We have another person who says that they have some concern about the discharge and poor water quality around one of the pump stations in Mount Vernon. Again, that's not a broad-based question. That's a very specific question. The homeowner has a right to know what can we do about that, and we will pursue that in terms of those terms.
But not in this, because
yeah, well, I just
specific.
think, I think it's important for us to talk about the broad-based things rather than
yeah.
here's a specific issue, there's a specific issue.
Yeah.
But having said that, I'm going to turn to Catherine Chaffee, our able Director of Communications, who is monitoring the chat that we have, and try to direct any particular questions, Catherine, that you think are broad-based on the environment that we should handle, and we'll go from there. Catherine Chaffee.
So we have the questions there.
Well, just read it out loud. Highlight it as we do during our press conferences.
So the first question is climate change. What are we doing about it here in Westchester?
Okay. Well, I think we touched on some of those things already, and let's.
Okay, the next one is
No. Let me address it since you asked as a general question. Since it's a broad-based question, the general sense of what a county government can do on climate change involves trying to move away from using the kinds of energy generation that comes from fossil fuel traditionally and move toward more use of electricity. So to move away from natural gas generated electricity to that which is more environmentally sensitive. With that thought in mind, let me just repeat what Pete said. We have a multiple approach in terms of, number one, conversion of our county bus fleet, 300 some odd buses and our Beeline bus system being converted to hybrid and or electric buses. We have a ways to go. Those buses are much more expensive than the traditional diesel buses, but we are phasing out the diesel buses, and as the lifespan of those buses ends, the replacement buses that we buy are hybrid or electric. We're not going to be able to have a full electric fleet because of what the load capacities are and some electric given the topography of Westchester County, but we can have quite a lot that are a combination of hybrid and then a number of electric as well. And we want to thank very directly the federal government. We received aid through our outgoing Congresswoman Anita Lowy to help us afford to get some of these buses. 2 years ago we had 78 buses. That already was more than a quarter of the fleet, and we've added to that since. Pete mentioned about our effort to try to help advance the infrastructure for electric vehicles by having more charging stations around the county. Now, that depends on where we own county property, and we can, unilaterally put in charging stations. We've done that at the North White Plains train station, which is part of the Bronx River Reservation. That parking lot, as it is further down the line in White Plains, happens to be publicly owned parking, and so we then have the ability to put in, I think, 10 chargers we put in there and opened it up just a little over a year ago for the charging purposes, people who are commuting every day. We also have put in and are in the process of putting in more electric vehicle charging stations in those prominent areas where we have other facilities. Mahansick Golf Course in Yorktown is one of them. The county center, which obviously, because it's being used as a healthcare facility now, isn't being used in the way that it was traditionally. But some of our other facilities around the county, Dunwoody, parks, and so forth, we put electric vehicle charging stations in there. We're also looking at, in terms of these things, the solar energy issues that Pete just talked about, and trying to use solar in specific locations to get us off the grid for site-specific areas so that we can use less. That's an example of how we use our immediate needs to run a county government in a productive way. What else would you want to add in terms of specific things, Pete? Perhaps what we're doing with food waste recycling, whatever you think is appropriate.
Yeah. So, our newest program, which nice segue here, George, is Planting Westchester, and that's just starting to get off the ground. We've got focus groups. There's 100 volunteers that are being brought in. These are scientists and botanists and well-known people, and this covers multiple different areas, including community gardens. So it's not just planting trees, but it's adding more food security, if you will, to some areas that may need it. But community gardens, all sorts of trees and plantings. Now, what that does is it sequesters the carbon, and we need to look at that as much as we can at Planting Westchester. I just got off a conference right now about the importance of trees and what they are, how good they are for urban settings,
right.
That cooling down as well as just aesthetics, but the cooling down aspect is key. Right. I can go on and on about that. But
Other questions?
Yep, so we have a question from Jennifer. She would like to know if the county would consider banning straws and banning balloon releases.
Okay. Ruth, I'm going to ask you as a legislator. I know that there's been some discussion on the board about using the board's power in a host of different ways. You did that to some degree with the plastic bag legislation and your advocacy. What's your advocacy about the next round of things where we try to eliminate from general usage certain products that we know are hard to biodegrade within our structure?
Yeah, so I was going to say I have come to this committee. It's like hot seating. There's been many years of environmental advocacy before me, and Nancy Barr was the chair before I took over in September. And I think we have a county legislature that is very interested in the environment, very interested in ways that we can work with the executive branch, but also with the state and the federal government to move people and businesses towards a more renewable future. And I think a straw ban is definitely on the table. We haven't really explored what that would look like. I know the legislature did do polystyrene, and that, as I said, when I was cleaning up the Bronx River, was really shocking to see, like I said, millions of these little pieces, because polystyrene does not degrade, it just breaks down and then gets into our food supply through fish. So I think that's a possibility, and we will talk about it. We're going to be doing initiatives in the new year. Right now we're in budget season, and we are looking at ways to increase the county's green sort of portfolio. I know Peter's been spearheading so many great initiatives. The food scrap recycling program is very, very popular. Can't wait to see that in every municipality. And
we'll start one up very shortly.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
And we really do have a really big push from young people. It's absolutely their number one issue. I have two 20 and 23-year-old children, and they want us to act. They want us to make changes, both in our personal home and in our business, but also legislatively. So I'm very motivated, and I'm sure everybody in this room is as well.
So what I would say to the person who inquired about this, contact legislator Ruth Walter. And before we finish, we'll ask her to give out her email address. 995-2800 reaches anybody in the legislature. 995-2900 reaches those of us in the executive branch administration. So whether it's banning balloon release or straws or any of these other initiatives, one of the things we'll have to look at, I'm sure you will look at, is whether or not the county has direct authority to do it. In some cases you do, in some cases you don't. It just depends on how the state of New York has allocated authority. Sometimes they leave it to the local communities. We hear a lot about leaf blowers, and there are people who want to ban leaf blowers. They think it's bad for the environment, noise, pollution. The county government cannot ban it across the board. That power belongs to local cities, towns, and villages. We can do it on our own property, and we have substantial park holdings where we would move leaves around and so forth. But someone will come to us and say, why can't you do this? And it's not within the authority of county government. But it's a crazy pattern. There's no way to know until you do the investigation on a particular issue whether you could, for the sake of this discussion, ban straws or balloons. But that certainly is a legislative initiative that the legislature would take the lead on. Catherine, next question.
And we're getting a lot of questions. We'll try to get to all of them. If your question isn't answered, as the county executive said, please call Pete Mccart. But Jennifer would like to know, and we get this question a lot, can you explain what percent of collected recyclable materials are actually recycled by the county? I've been told two very different answers.
Peter?
I would say nearly 100%. I think it truly is about 90.
Pete, take the mask off.
Sorry. I would, it's close to 100, but it's about 98%. It really is very high. And the reason why we know this is because we get money for it. There's a value to our paper and our plastic. And this is actually a very good question, very appropriate. It is very important that we continue, like your mom and dad did, to source separate. That's a key component. Our recyclables have a tremendous value. Where other communities or other counties or other jurisdictions, they went to a single stream where they're combining, there was a thought with environmentalists that would be better because you just put it all in one place and they'll recycle it. It's actually worse because you don't have the value and then you're just burning it or whatever you're doing. But we get paid for our plastic. We have very good plastic, paper, glass, and there's a value in it. So that's why we know it's recyclable.
I think the key for the person who asked the question is each jurisdiction has separate contractual relationships on how they dispose of their recyclables. And because we have a more environmentally sensitive source separation, we have glass and colored glass and plain glass and newspapers and different types of things separated, the contracts we have to dispose of them do not go to places where we get rid of them and then they just dispose of them in a normal fashion. But that's not the case everywhere, and I've read some of the articles perhaps that the person who inquired about it said they'd seen a 60 Minutes show where some place in some other state just dumps all the stuff. And so, but in this case, that's not true in Westchester.
In fact, we started a campaign, Recycle Right. Not recycle more necessarily, but recycle right. And that's key because when you recycle right, we can then put it on the market and people will take it and it's got value.
Yeah, just from a practical standpoint, human lifestyle thing. I'm responsible, to make sure that things are recyclable in a home. And you get a piece of cardboard that has in it some plastic sheeting that covers like a front portion of it. The plastic sheeting is not recyclable in the same way that the cardboard is. You got to pull it out. You got to remove it. You get a box where something came in it with those styrofoam peanuts in it. You can't put the whole box with the styrofoam peanuts out for pickup. You have to dump out the peanuts and dispose of them in a different fashion. That little extra prep for some people is more work than they want to do, but that's how you get a clean recyclable stream and a better chance for recycling to get to the right place. Next question. I'm sorry, excuse me. Ruth, go ahead.
So I think you started by saying, change feels difficult sometimes, and I want to also point out that, we are changing all the time. I mean, how many of us expected to be Zooming all our meetings, 8 months ago? We have the more powerful computer than any of our parents or grandparents had ever seen in our pockets. We're walking around and we do change. So I'm just thinking in my head of that plastic film that everybody puts over their leftovers before they put it in the refrigerator, and now they're making waxed covers. And as a business owner, we do use plastic. We try to minimize it as much as possible. I use packing peanuts that are made out of starch, which are dissolved in water. I have done that for many years. and I guess my hope and my expectation is that we continue to evolve, we continue to innovate, and we don't have to use styrofoam packing peanuts anymore. And there will always be solutions that we can choose, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of those innovations and using them as less impactful on the environment. So just wanted to say
Next
that.
question, Catherine.
We have a comment here that we'll just share. Biodegradable packing peanuts are actually cheaper than styrofoam ones. That's what somebody who's listening has just said.
Excellent.
So Mark would like to know, will Westchester County declare a climate emergency to address the threat of climate change?
Well, I think we recognize, Mark, that we're in an emergency. The declaration of it, as a statement is a general statement of policy. What's more important, in my judgment, is not whether we declare it, which we could do, is do we come up with specific actions that we can take. One of the things that I've been frustrated by, and I've been in different levels of government, is when we pick a date like 2050, and we say by 2050 we will hit such and such a goal. And everybody applauds the creation of a goal. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. 2050 is 30 years from today. If I'm alive in 30 years, I'd be 97, I hope, but you never know. And I'm probably not going to be in any kind of a position to deliver on the commitment if I make that kind of a statement now. So what I'd much rather see is our federal government make the statements about what our national policy ought to be rather than a local government, but have the local government do the specific things necessary to reach that goal. And it doesn't mean that stating the goal isn't fair, but we wind up, feeling a sense of comfort because we've made a statement as opposed to doing the concrete tasks. But I welcome any of the concrete tasks that people suggest to determine if they're doable. And you also have to recognize we have a government with lots of competing goals. We have to deal with people who worry about how much taxes they pay. We have to worry about people who are poor and how do they get basic health care services. We have to worry about issues of transportation and affordable housing. There's so many competing needs at the table. And so we have to make sure that as we craft our environmental policy, it fits across the board with all of these things, but it meshes within these things. And it can't be, there's one thing that's important and nothing else is important. It all has to fit together if we're going to have the kind of society we want, because we do have to get public buy-in on the things we're going to do. And if we think that just by asserting it is good enough, we've just gotten a big lesson in this pandemic. We all understand that wearing a mask is an important way to stop the spread of virus. And most of us are trying, we see it right here between the three of us, trying to keep the mask on, keep the mask off, to communicate. There are people who just won't do it. They just won't do it. And the question that government has to ask itself is, how do you get an unwilling population to go along with a public policy? You have to convince the vast majority of people that the policy you're advocating for is worthwhile. And that has to be done, in my judgment, at a national level, because you'll have some other county someplace else arguing the exact opposite. And then it's really, you pick which policy you want to follow. So I do think that we face a climate crisis. I say that as a matter of understanding the reality of the moment. But I do think that the federal government has to take a role of leadership. It has not over the last 4 years. Let's hope that there's a change ahead that will help us move in the right direction. Any comments?
Yeah, and
Please.
we did create the Climate Crisis Task Force. So we have established that, and that's utilizing volunteers, but as well as engaging the various departments within the county government. So, I mean, we understand that there is a crisis, and the state also has the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, establishing those goals, so we can adhere to that.
And I also want to thank the county executive for reinvigorating the Stormwater Advisory Board, which is really important in my district. We flood regularly, and getting people together on these advisory boards means that the priorities can be set. And maybe it isn't a 30-year goal, maybe it's a 4-year goal or a 2-year goal to take these steps to mitigate some of the worst parts of the climate crisis that I think we know that we're in. Yeah.
Catherine?
The next question we have is if the county would consider reducing bus routes to lessen the footprint on the environment.
Well, I think for a number of reasons we're looking at that right now. The reduction of bus routes is a combination of what is our ridership and how necessary is it for us to run bus routes to benefit the poor people who need the transportation. Generally speaking, in this county, the people that use buses are those that include senior citizens who may not have access to a car, for whatever reason, may not be able to drive a car anymore, and people who are poor. And generally, when they use the bus, they use it to get to work. That's the general situation here in the county. To some extent to shop, to some extent to go to a medical appointment. But the way the routes run, they really run in a commuting scenario where people take it in the morning to go to point A, and they come back from point A to their point of origination at other times of the evening. So yes, I expect we're going to be looking at the bus routes, and most likely because of ridership issues right now, we probably will have a diminution of it. But I will tell you that the decision is not just we have to run less buses. I think the decision is we have to run cleaner buses, and that's really what the thrust of what we're doing is, because as I said before, there is a need for public transportation. You cannot tell poor people, sorry, you'll have to walk, because you have no other alternative. You've got to be able to balance off competing needs. I do think cleaner buses is part of the answer, and part of the answer is going through our bus routes and making sure that the routes that don't have ridership, that don't really not only produce revenue, don't have ridership, and add to the general pollution, no matter how clean they may be, than those we do eliminate. But I think it's a balancing of all those things.
And buses are better than cars.
Much better.
You know, mass transit, I mean, we have a very good mass transit system here with our train system. We got the 3 lines and our bus system in itself. It's much better than anything else. Commuting, we have a great, the 511 ride share program that we have that we use for our own employees, but promote and help support. These are all important issues.
Okay.
Catherine?
And just once again, we're getting so many questions. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can.
I'll repeat the concern. In the limited time we have, another 20 minutes or so, we'll take a handful of questions more. P. Mccart at westchestergov.com. Ruth, do you want to give your?
It's Walter at westchesterlegislators.com.
Walter, singular, at westchesterlegislators.com.
Thank you. Thank you, George.
So the next question comes from Susan. She would like to know if the county has any plans to ban pesticides in all parks, golf courses, etc., similar to what Philadelphia did.
Well, I believe at this stage of the game we've made a significant change in our policy. Peter, you able to address that?
Not exactly. That's Parks and Conservation, but we.
You got to take the mask off, Pete. When you
Oh my gosh!
got to remember to do that, Bill.
I know, buddy. You're good at it.
Take it on. Take it off.
So that's that's more of a Parks and Conservation issue. But we have we barely use any pesticides, and we certainly don't spray them wantonly, or we certainly are not. People are saying, why are the helicopters spraying? We're not helicopter spraying. We're not running trucks running down the roads.
We're not spraying at all. The use of pesticides, I think, will for the person who asked the question, if they can provide information to follow up, we'll do a double check on it. I think we're using those types of things at a very minimal level. The same would be true of herbicides. We had a project at Scout Field where we had to get rid of invasives, and we made it a point to not use herbicides. The contractor was ready to do it, and we had to hold them back from doing it.
And we were very grateful for that not happening.
So
It's
to the
so
extent,
close to the Bronx River.
to the extent, are we doing a better job of it? We could always do a better job. We'll make sure that those things are eliminated from our usages. Next question.
Do you know anything about the wind energy projects that I've been hearing about?
I think Pete is more than ready to take the mask off and answer this question. Peter?
So this is really super exciting. Good question. There's 3 super large projects going up off the coast of Long Island. One is really out in the middle. It's really off the coast of Rhode Island, off Montauk Point. One is really straight out from the Hampton area, and then the other one is down in the corner between New Jersey and New York, off New York Harbor, basically. The fascinating point is the windmills that are going off at the deeper water out there, they are the size of the Empire State Building. From the tip to the top of the tip of the big blade is as high as the Empire State Building. That's
amazing.
That's amazing. So these are long, you're talking about after we're gone. These are not just a project and it's going to be a project. These are ongoing projects where they're going to constantly be adding and building off of this. And there's 3 of them. And I would like to talk to the fact that we look at us here in Westchester as an opportunity to engage those projects with either our the people that are residents who live here. So I'm working with Bridget Gibbons, it's just in the planning process right now of doing a work fair specifically for those projects. And there'll be a lot of engineers, very high paying jobs. And we're looking to do that sometime this spring. of doing that work fair for that. So that's very exciting. And there's a lot of jobs. There's going to be tons of jobs. And it's going to be, like I said, ongoing, many years, hundreds of years where they're going to adding to this.
So we've identified for the wind, to answer the question, some offshore wind projects that are off in the Atlantic, stretching anywhere from Massachusetts down to the tip of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next question.
COVID has brought with it the incredible use of plastic. Are you concerned about adding more of this plastic into the waste stream?
Ruth, do you want to comment on that? I know
Sure.
that's an issue too.
So Judith Enck, who used to be an EPA commissioner for the state of New York, came on our community to talk about how, as the oil and gas companies are losing revenue using for people using electric vehicles, as we talked about, they're now moving to increase their production of plastic. And we all have been in an airport pre-COVID where we see, an apple that is encased in a plastic clamshell. And, it is starting to become common to see plastic in everything that we do. And listen, plastic is a wonderful material. A lot of my car, I think, is made out of plastic. It crumples a lot easier than the metal used to. But the single-use plastic, the use of, every takeout order has, enough plastic forks and knives to last you, another 3 weeks. It really has been exploding as far as I can see. And, again, it's back to talking to consumers. It's back to asking the delivery services to put a little checkbox on their order form so you can say, please don't send me any plastic cutlery because I'm in my house and I have forks and knives, and if you need it, then you don't have to check that. So we're looking at different ways to get people to refuse, right? So it's reduce, reuse, recycle, but there's also a fourth one, which is refuse. Don't take all those plastic cutleries. Don't buy apples that are in a clamshell, and just getting people aware of the fact that we don't need to, conserve energy and on our buses, and then use the same amount of carbon to make all this plastic.
Very good.
Yeah.
Can I talk about the ninth floor and the fact that we
Yeah.
we went away from all plastic uses, single-use plastic. We took that on. We all took a pledge to make sure that we're all. Yeah, cheers to us. That was the first thing. I was in a meeting here in the conference room, and I saw everybody using, plastic or paper coffee cups, and I'm like, this is just gotta go. And it doesn't look right for the county executive to be drinking out of a plastic
Just
cup.
do the right thing.
Yeah.
What matters is we have to do the right thing. We're going to try to go rapid fire so we get as many questions in as possible.
We got 3 hours, right?
Yeah, not.
So we're getting a lot of questions about planting Westchester, and the citizens want to know how they can get involved in it.
Pete, all yours.
Okay, cool. Well, the first way is to, I took my mask off, planting Westchester at westchestergov.com. If you want to get involved, that's the best way. Planting Westchester at westchestergov.com. And you could tell us about what your focus area is and what you would like to, how you would like to participate, and how you would like to add in. And that's the best way for people to get involved.
We're also getting a lot of questions about, and I hope I don't mispronounce it, dam scammer. Would anybody like to address that issue?
A dam scammer is a energy plant that's being developed up in Orange County. Westchester County does not have a direct involvement in it. Ruth, have the members of the Board of Legislators been opining on that issue? Do you want to comment?
We signed a letter to ask that the dam scammer plant does not go from a peak production plant to a constant production. It's an issue of environmental justice. It's located in Newburgh, New York, which is not appreciative of more environmental impact. And, it rests in the hands of the governor, and, it's something that I think local advocates have been very vocal about, and I appreciate especially their passion, because I think that's how things get done. But just to segue to Divest New York, which Tom DiNapoli, the controller of New York, just announced that he is going to divest the pension funds of New York State. It took them 8 years. So I do think that some of these things take some time and some attention, and we're happy to work on this particular advocacy issue, but we have all of us signed a letter saying that we support that dance camera stays as it is.
And before we go on, I would just broaden to say that there are many issues out there that are statewide in focus, that maybe even national in focus. People ask us from time to time to comment or to support or to oppose. Every first quarter of the year, January, February, the Board of Legislators develops a legislative package for Albany and then one for Washington, D.C. The administration reviews it, we sign on to it, negotiate a little bit, and it becomes a joint legislative package. And in that package, we oftentimes support legislation and actions that we think are good environmental policies that we don't have control over, we don't have a vote on, but we're encouraging a particular point of view. So to the extent that some of these environmental issues involve regulation at the state or the federal level, we try to use that joint legislative package to accomplish that mission. Because to be candid with you, an individual letter from any one of us may or may not matter in a national issue. They may not necessarily be waiting for George Latimer to have his opinion registered. But if we can do it as a government and we think it's cohesive in a packet, then we think we can use that as a tool.
Okay, next question is from Jennifer. Several school districts have taken amazing steps to move towards zero waste. Can the county do anything to increase the number of schools that are doing that?
Well, again, we don't have direct authority over public schools. The public school and the school boards report directly to the state education department. I have seen some of those initiatives. During my prior assignment as a New York State Senator, I represented a number of communities, and I remember the initiatives that were being made in the Blind Brook School District on environmental waste. It was really very impressive what they were doing in the elementary school. In that district, they had a singular elementary school and then a joint high school, middle school. It's a relatively small population school district, 1,600 students, and with two major facilities, they could do certain things in the cafeteria that would help deal with food waste and other kinds of circumstances. I think what would be interesting for the person who's asked this question, if you can communicate to us, communicate to Peter Mccart, an example of a school district in Westchester that is getting it right, we will be happy because we communicate with the school districts all the time. And Ruth and I have been on PTA calls with various schools in Bronxville and Yonkers, and I've done that elsewhere. We would be happy to take the best practices and just share them amongst other individuals in the school districts. They may be doing that already that we don't know about between districts, but we can certainly say if the person who asked the question says, let me tell you that the district that I live in is doing a fabulous job, or the district that my friend is in is doing a fabulous job, but I do in my district, I don't have enough leverage. If you can help us identify what represents a best practices scenario, then we will be happy to share it. And hopefully the sharing will make some improvements. We said it all the time with local governments. And I served once upon a time as a councilman in my home community. And we would be in our world doing something and have no idea that somebody 4 or 5 towns or villages away was doing something that we would have replicated if we knew about it. That's really how we got to food scrap recycling, because it began in Scarsdale, and the initiative of Ron Schulhoff. And school, actually. Well, that's right. But I mean, Ron Schulhoff and Michelle Sterling took the idea from the municipal level of Scarsdale and started, proselytizing around. And I saw them when they were in Romantic Town, and that helped take a good idea in one place and multiply it out. So that would be the best way for us to do it. We can't mandate it as a county, but we can certainly share it. And I know Ruth and her colleagues, because all of the communities of Westchester are represented by one of the 17 legislators, and it's true when I was one as well. Once you get a good idea and you share it with all of the communities within your district, you're already cross-pollinating and trying to get some activity happening.
Okay. It's a great question from Karen. She says, as Westchester residents, what can we wake up tomorrow and do to support a better environment here in our county?
Friends, what can you do tomorrow morning when you wake up that would support a better environment?
I'll go first. You can, if you do not already have solar on your roof, you can opt into a community solar program. And if you're interested in that, if you're interested in that, reach out to me, and I'll set you up with that. But you can also go to sustainablewestchester.org. They have programs for this. I think that's one thing. There's multiple things, but okay.
So again, back to the conservation part of this movement, which is, let's try to use less energy to heat our homes. So one thing you could do is you could lower your thermostat. Because I think sometimes, and I know we've had this discussion, office buildings are kept too cold, and sometimes we're too warm in the winter. So that stuff is changeable at the personal level, and then let's try to see if we can change it at the legislative level, where maybe 2 degrees a little bit warmer in the summer and 2 degrees a little bit cooler in the winter. It's actually supposed to be better for you healthy to not be in a super hot room in the winter. I don't like the cold, but I would be willing to do that tomorrow. So.
And I would say, and Pete Mccart will give you the specifics if you contact him, there's a little device that you can buy and put it, so you have to have a yard. I assume you won't do this in an apartment, but you have a little backyard, you have a little space area where you can put compostable material in it, and over a period of time get some nice mulch out of it, and it's inexpensive to near zero. And if you get one of those and put it in your yard and put your food waste in it, you'll be doing a very good thing for the environment. You can contact Pete Mccart, he'll tell you more about it. That's right. Next question.
Okay, we have somebody here who just wants to add that they have solar on their roof and they love it. So there's a vote there.
It's amazing. No electric bill.
This might be the perfect last question, but we'll see. What is the best way to celebrate the environment in Westchester County?
We'll start with Legislator Ruth Walter.
So,
the best way to celebrate.
I would say go to a park. We have beautiful parks in the county that have been lovingly and carefully taken care of, especially in COVID. I've gotten to see new ones as a legislator that I didn't have a knowledge of before. You can get out a little map and see all of the different parks that we have. We should celebrate the fact that we've set this land aside from development to have trees and to have nature, and we should enjoy it.
Yeah. I would add to that and say clean up the parks too. There's a lot of park cleanups, and not just county parks, but all sorts of park cleanups, and they're actually very rewarding to get you outside. It's fresh air, and you
Take
get
the mask off, Pete.
And there's something called, have you heard of plogging? Where you take a little bag, and as you're walking around, you just, and you can wear gloves, because there are organized cleanups, but you can also do it in your regular day to day.
So that, and perhaps join the Westchester Parks Foundation. Become a member of that.
Good way to celebrate it.
Yeah.
So,
how about you?
And I would say pick a day. You may have to plan your day around this, but pick a day where you're not going to drive your car. Figure out how you can do whatever your chores would be that day. Maybe you'll have to push them off to another day, and spend the day, and don't get behind the wheel of the car. For me, you would think it's impossible, but there's a lot of things going on Zoom. So, but plan a day where you don't turn over that combustion engine, and see, because in the long run, the lifestyle changes are going to require us to figure out how to do things differently, and you got to try it to see how you can handle life, because we still want to come and go and do the things we have to do, and try to make it worthwhile.
Maybe take the bus one day. Try taking the bus. It probably goes right by your house and goes to wherever you want to go. So
you said it. So we've come to the end of our hour. We've been very happy to be joined by Peter Mccart, Director of Sustainability for Westchester County, here in our executive floor, and Legislator Ruth Walter, who is the chair of the Environment and Health Committee for the Westchester County Board of Legislators. They're almost on the cusp of finishing a budget. A few more gray hairs between now and next Monday, and then hopefully we'll have it all where we need to have it. But I want to thank both Ruth and Pete for being with us tonight. Very helpful. We thank Catherine Chaffee, our Director of Communications, who helped feed us a question, and this terrific crew of people that's with us, John Borst, Emily Lavin, and Phil and Dave and everybody else who's contributed to this cause. We will continue our series of town hall meetings after the new year, and we'll have some additional topics. We'll have additional people with us to talk about these things. We are continuing our COVID updates every Monday and Thursday, although we make adjustments in holiday weeks, and we'll try to deliver information, this being tomorrow, Thursday's time for our next update. Try to keep you posted on what's happening with that, and then we'll give announcements that relate to COVID, and then some other announcements of general benefit. As both Ruth and Pete said, there are things that you can enjoy in Westchester County. One of them is Winter Wonderland at the Kensico Dam Plaza. It is this year a drive-through. I know that's the opposite of using your car, but as opposed to walking around, and running the risk of COVID infection, we took what was an in-person event and turned it into a drive-through event. And you pay by car rather than by kid, so it's a cheaper process this year for those of you who can throw a few kids in the back of the car and give them an enjoyable half an hour, 45 minutes at Kensico Dam Plaza. Tickets are available up to January 3rd. If you're a golfer, you'll still golf in this weather. I admire that you would still be golfing in this weather, and you can golf up until January 30th unless it snows. Our public golf courses have been fabulously well used during the course of this year, and we're very happy for that. We have at Lasden Park in Somers on Route 35 our Holiday on a Hill train program. As a little kid, I love trains. It's a great opportunity, another thing you can do. Westchester County Parks and Recreation to your benefit. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next month with another topic on a town hall session. Feel free to reach out to us. Reach out to Ruth as a legislator, Pete and the rest of us in the executive branch. Stay safe and have a good night.